Hi everyone. Welcome to my PowerPoint documentary presentation on Marcus Garvey. Primarily, my approach will involve drawing upon various sources, with minimal commentary on my part. The primary aim of this concise presentation is to catalyze further exploration on your end, enabling you to develop your own conclusions through independent research. Rely not solely on this brief exposition, rather, ensure the credibility of information through meticulous scrutiny. Delve into every nuance and facet presented here, recognizing that, on the surface, it might be perceived by many as highly controversial. Marcus Garvey was a Roman Catholic. Quote, Jamaican national hero, the Right Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, 1887–1940, died as a Roman Catholic in good standing. At Garvey's Jamaican funeral in 1964 at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Kingston, the Right Reverend Monsignor Gladstone Wilson, 1906–1974, preached a eulogy, in which he informed the gathering that before Garvey died in 1940, he had been received into the Catholic Church by a priest of Holy Trinity Church in the borough of Hammersmith, London. Unquote. Peter Aspute, Catholic Opinion, Issue No. 8, February 2023, St. Michael's Theological College. To the left of your screen is Mr. Peter Aspute, accompanied by one of Marcus Garvey's sons. On the right side of your screen is Marcus Garvey, the Roman Catholic hero of Jamaica, adorned in his Masonic tunic. Pay attention to the Maltese cross of the Knights of Malta prominently displayed on the left side of his Masonic attire. It's noteworthy that Garvey opted to become a Freemason, asserting the right of every individual to choose their own destiny. I momentarily digress for a brief clarification. The current painting on display showcases several figures adorned with the Maltese cross. Within this artwork, we observe Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II adorned in a crown and full regalia, accompanied by the symbol of the Knights Templar. Notably, a photograph of Marcus Garvey also reveals him wearing the Knights Templar symbol. A comprehensive exploration of the Knights Templar and an in-depth analysis of the symbolism of the Maltese cross exceed the scope of this presentation. Can you recognize one of history's prominent musicians portrayed in the painting? Interestingly, he was a Freemason, and a significant portion of his musical compositions celebrates Freemasonry. I leave it to you to connect the dots and draw your own conclusions. Quote, Garvey viewed himself as a Christian. He had been reared a Methodist, but he later converted to Roman Catholicism. He regularly proclaimed his commitment to the spiritual brotherhood of man, and he took many opportunities to explain the aims and objectives of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, because of a desire to be Christian friends with the white race. Still, Garvey's separatist paradigm caused many educated, upper-class blacks and whites to shun him as a black racist. This and other derision, along with his own, internal, movement-based failures, ultimately congealed into an anti-Garvey backlash. From this, emerged a sentiment that prompted the government to investigate the prophet of Africanism. Despite the fact that he was subsequently imprisoned and finally deported, Garvey's impact inspired a number of offshoot developments that, today, keep alive his influence. Unquote. New World Encyclopedia caption Marcus Garvey. Quote, Jamaica's first national hero, the Right Excellent Marcus Mosiah Garvey, 1887–1940, was brought up a Methodist, but converted to Roman Catholicism later in life while in England. His philosophy and opinions reflect quite closely the social teachings of the Catholic Church, which were much discussed in progressive circles at the time. The first Catholic social encyclical Rerum Novarum of New Things, issued by Pope Leo XIII in 1891, caused quite a stir as it spoke up for the rights of the oppressed working classes, one of Garvey's strong themes. The second Catholic social encyclical Quadragesimo Anno, the 40th year, issued by Pope Pius XI in 1931, was even more strident, and may have precipitated his conversion. Unquote. Our Catholic National Heroes. Jamaica Gleaner, October 27, 2013. Marcus Garvey was a Prince Hall Freemason. Quote, Amy Jacques Garvey later recalled that Garvey became a Mason through the influence of John E. Bruce and Dr. F. W. Elligor, but he did not attend Masonic meeting. He was always too busy, so the connection dropped. Moreover, she disclosed that UNIA chapters operated quite freely within the ranks of black fraternities. In addition, the UNIA was a uniformed body. The higher members wore uniforms similar to that of a Knights Templar. In a sense, there is no denying Garvey Masonic connections. And Garvey was not alone. Many of the Muslim groups received their knowledge of Islam from the Shriners' Order. They simply adopted various customs from the order. Unquote. Keith Moore 32 degree. Freemasonry, Greek Philosophy, the Prince Hall Fraternity, and the Egyptian page 28. Quote, during the final 4 years of his life, Garvey turned even more emphatically toward the Masonic ideal, based on secret knowledge. With the defeat of Ethiopia in the Italo-Ethiopian War of 1935 to 1936, and the rapid escalation of militarism throughout Europe and Asia, Garvey revised dramatically his previous estimates of what political movements alone could be expected to accomplish. Thus, he viewed as problematic the absence of Masonry in his, the Negroes, political ideals, noting that there is nothing secret in what he is aiming at, for his own hope of preservation. Garvey was alluding to the evolution of the fraternal idea, from its earlier craft stage, into a potent political vehicle, one based on the organization of secret revolutionary brotherhoods. Unquote. University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, African Studies Center, Volume 1, 1826 to August 1919. Prince Hall Freemason. Quote, Prince Hall Freemasonry is the oldest recognized and continuously active organization founded by African Americans. Prince Hall Freemasonry had its beginnings on March 6, 1775, when Prince Hall, 1748 to 1807, an abolitionist and civil rights activist, along with 14 other free black men, were initiated into Freemasonry. These men later organized African Lodge No. 1 on July 3, 1775. In 1784, they petitioned the Grand Lodge of England for a charter. It was granted, and African Lodge No. 1 became African Lodge No. 459 of Boston, Massachusetts. Unquote. Library of Congress, USA. Point of importance. Marcus Garvey, Jamaica's national hero and Roman Catholic, was a member of the Freemasons and held good standing within the Roman Catholic Church. Having validating that Marcus Garvey was a practicing Roman Catholic and a member of the Prince Hall Masonic Order, let's revisit some points that might have been overlooked during the quoted segments. There might be aspects of Garvey's Roman Catholic and Masonic philosophies that escaped your attention. We are poised to examine Garvey's eclectic philosophy, which is grounded in Catholicism and draws inspiration from its social policies, as well as Freemasonry. We'll also explore how Jim Crow laws played a role in shaping Marcus Garvey's philosophical outlook. A thorough analysis of Catholicism, with a particular focus on Rerum Novarum, will shed light on the intellectual journey of Marcus Garvey, the Roman Catholic national hero from Jamaica. It is important to highlight Garvey's unwavering Catholic commitment and his alignment with the papacy. Please be aware that despite the summary I've provided thus far, it's crucial not to let my views sway your perspective. I strongly encourage you to independently research and verify all the information presented thus far. Keep in mind that I will be returning to quoting. Let's delve into how this distinctive amalgamation of influences guided his philosophical perspectives. Let us begin this segment with Jim Crow laws. How did the Jim Crow laws influence Garvey's philosophy? Let's examine the nature of the Jim Crow laws. Additionally, we will explore the connections between Jim Crow and the Ku Klux Klan, as well as the parallels between Jim Crow and Nazism. We'll delve into the intersections of Jim Crow and Marcus Garvey's philosophy. Recall that I am quoting, so you need to connect the dots. The nature of Jim Crow laws. Quote, Jim Crow laws were a collection of state and local statutes that legalized racial segregation. Named after a black minstrel show character, the laws, which existed for about 100 years, from the post-Civil War era until 1968, were meant to marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, hold jobs, get an education, or other opportunities. Those who attempted to defy Jim Crow laws often faced arrest, fines, jail sentences, violence, and death. Laws forbade African Americans from living in white neighborhoods. Segregation was enforced for public pools, phone booths, hospitals, asylums, jails, and residential homes for the elderly and handicapped. Some states required separate textbooks for black and white students. New Orleans mandated the segregation of prostitutes according to race. In Atlanta, African Americans in court were given a different Bible from white people to swear on. Marriage and cohabitation between white and black people was strictly forbidden in most southern states. It was not uncommon to see signs posted at town and city limits warning African Americans that they were not welcome there. Unquote. History.com editors. Jim Crow laws equals Ku Klux Klan philosophy. Quote, this is a white man's organization, exalting the Caucasian race, and teaching the doctrine of white supremacy. This does not mean that we are enemies of the colored and mongrel races. But it does mean that we are organized to establish the solidarity and to realize the mission of the white race. All of Christian civilization depends upon the preservation and upbuilding of the white race, and it is the mission of the Ku Klux Klan to proclaim this doctrine until the white race shall come into its own. Unquote. Ideals of the Ku Klux Klan. Jim Crow laws inspired Nazism. Quote, according to James Q. Whitman, author of Hitler's American Model, that country was the United States. America in the early 20th century was the leading racist jurisdiction in the world, says Whitman, who is a professor at Yale Law School. Nazi lawyers, as a result, were interested in, looked very closely at, and were ultimately influenced by American race law. In particular, Nazis admired the Jim Crow-era laws that discriminated against Black Americans and segregated them from white Americans, and they debated whether to introduce similar segregation in Germany. Yet they ultimately decided that it wouldn't go far enough. One of the most striking Nazi views was that Jim Crow was a suitable racist program in the United States, because American blacks were already oppressed and poor, he says. But then in Germany, By contrast, where the Jews, as the Nazis imagined it, were rich and powerful, it was necessary to take more severe measures. The idea of banning Jewish and Aryan marriages presented the Nazis with a dilemma. How would they tell who was Jewish and who was not? After all, race and ethnic categories are socially constructed, and interracial relationships produce offspring who don't fall neatly into one box. Unquote. Becky Little. How the Nazis were inspired by Jim Crow. Jim Crow laws and Marcus Garvey. Quote, Ernest Severe Cox was a committed white supremacist who advocated on behalf of anti-miscegenation laws, and in 1922 confounded with the composer John Powell the Anglo-Saxon Clubs of America, a Richmond-based, nationwide organization devoted to maintaining a strict separation of the races. In 1923, Cox published White America, a book that described his travels in Africa, and argues that race mixing would result in the collapse of white civilization. He also wrote extensively on eugenics, a now discredited scientific movement aimed at proving the superiority of the white race. Together with composer Powell and Virginia State Registrar Walter Plecker, Cox played an influential role in lobbying the Virginia General Assembly to pass the Racial Integrity Act of 1924, a strict anti-miscegenation law, and later the Massenburg Bill, which banned racial mixing in all public places. In September 1924, Cox entered into an unlikely alliance with Marcus Garvey, the Jamaican-born black nationalist, who founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Garvey's black nationalism stood in stark contrast to Cox's racial views, but Garvey nonetheless shared Cox's belief that the repatriation of blacks to Africa offered the only viable solution to the nation's racial issues. Unquote. Douglas Smith. Encyclopedia Virginia. Caption: Ernest Severe Cox. Marcus Garvey's letter to Ernest S. Cox, white supremacist and eugenicist. Quote, P.O. Box 1733, Atlanta, Georgia, August 8, 1925. Dear Mr. Cox, I sent you a telegram this morning, which I trust you have received. As stated therein, I have just completed reading the book, White America. It is wonderful. From the white man's point of view, it is a masterpiece in history, ethnology, and general race literature. It should be in the hand of every intelligent white person, not only in America but Europe, South and Central America, as also in the hand of even intelligent Negro. I do not, and cannot agree with much of the historical data in reference to the black man. As a Negro, I have opinions of my own, but I fully appreciate the fact that you have written from the white man's viewpoint, and in that, I heartily agree, and am in full sympathy. If I were of your race, I would have written with the same force, and probably with prejudice. You have been as fair as anyone could expect under the circumstances. You have been much more liberal than the average writer or author. History, as you know, ancient, is largely doubtful and highly speculative. The points of vantage credited to the one race can be easily claimed by the other, yet that is not a matter of dispute between us. The fact is that the modem Negro is a lazy, good-for-nothing slumberer. This is my conviction arrived at by close and careful study and experience. And if something is not done for him, he will die as other unfit races have. Unquote. Same passage. Org. Marcus Garvey Letter to Ernest S. Cox. Sarah L. Trembani's noted in her thesis, and I quote, On a trip to New York, Powell gave a speech to the UNIA on racial purity. To ensure his acceptance, Garvey penned a letter of introduction for John Powell by Marcus Garvey, which highlighted Garvey's appraisal of Powell and ASCOA. Members of the Anglo-Saxon clubs are honest and honorable in their desire to purify and preserve the white race, even as we are determined to purify and standardize our race. We, the two organizations, should work together for the purpose of bringing about the ideal sought, the purification of the races, their autonomous separation, and the unbridled freedom of self-development and self-expression. Those who are against this are enemies of both races and rebels against morality, nature, and God. I unhesitatingly endorse the race purity idea of Mr. Powell and his organization, and I have pledged my moral support to their program in that direction, expecting of the honorable and honest of his race the same regard and support for ours. Garvey's sentiments were reciprocated in Powell's speech, which greatly praised Garvey's leadership, calling Garvey that great leader who has sought to do for his race what the greatest of white Americans sought to do for that race, and to encourage that race to do for itself. None other than Abraham Lincoln, Powell pledged the support of the white people in the South of this country, who realized Garvey's importance. Powell was convinced of the value of Garvey's colonization movement before the two of them became publicly aligned. In fact, it was once again his wife-to-be, Louise Burley, who helped him convince friends such as Ernest S. Cox that Garveyism, if successful, would benefit white Americans as much as it would black Americans. Garvey, at the same time, spoke publicly about white America's efforts to mandate segregation in favorable terms. Instead of stressing the inclusion of blacks in white society, he spoke about the need for both races to maintain their purity. Unquote. Trembanis, Sarah L. Strange Bedfellows, eugenicists, white supremacists, and Marcus Garvey in Virginia, 1922 to 1927, 2001. Dissertations, theses, and master's projects. William and Mary. Paper 153-962-4397. The well-known saying, "Birds of a feather flock together," takes an unexpected turn when considering the connection between Garvey, esteemed as Jamaica's national Roman Catholic hero, with a distinguished reputation, and individuals in the USA who advocate for white supremacism and eugenics. Quoting Sarah L. Trembanis, Garvey, Powell, Plecker, and Cox found common ground in their strong belief in the primacy of racial essentialism. Unquote. This prompts a crucial question. Are Garvey, recognized as Jamaica's esteemed national Roman Catholic hero, and these controversial ideologies truly aligned? It's up to you to decide whether he was in alignment with these citizens of the United States. Examining this association leads us to the NIH website, specifically the section titled Eugenics and Scientific Racism. Eugenics is described as a scientifically flawed and immoral theory of racial improvement and planned breeding that gained popularity during the early 20th century. Eugenicists worldwide believed in perfecting human beings and eliminating societal issues through genetics and heredity. They endorsed methods such as involuntary sterilization, segregation, and social exclusion to rid society of individuals deemed unfit. As emphasized earlier, I encourage you to independently connect the dots. Verify all information through thorough research, and avoid letting my summary unduly influence your conclusions.
Of all the people buried here in historic Hollywood Cemetery, including presidents, generals, and statesmen, few have had the impact of Dr. Walter Plecker. His stormy legacy continues today.
My parents always made sure that we knew the story about what Walter Plecker had done and how it had affected our people.
Plecker was a menace to Virginia Indians over many years.
Well, Dr. Plecker was convinced that there was a need to purify the white race. He thought that he was preserving the Commonwealth of Virginia, that he was maintaining the United States of America, and most importantly to him, that he was protecting the white race.
For 34 years, starting in 1912, Dr. Plecker was the director of the state's Bureau of Vital Statistics, carefully compiling birth and death records. Anyone who had one drop of other than white blood was listed as colored. They were mongrels, in his view. Plecker was relentless. With great energy, he compiled lists and wrote letters chastising whites who applied for marriage licenses with those Plecker thought were impure.
There's no question that Plecker was incredibly aggressive about using the few prerogatives the law gave him to register people. He used those prerogatives really to threaten people, to coerce them. Dr. Plecker once boasted that he had a list of people by race that rivaled that list that was kept by Hitler of the Jews.
Virginia Indians particularly felt his wrath. Quote, like rats when you're not watching, he wrote, they've been sneaking in their birth certificates through their own midwives.
You know, we couldn't claim we were Indian. It was against the law to say we were Indian. What do we claim? You know, we're not black and we're not white.
That whole idea that you are not what you believe yourself to be.
Whole groups of people who formerly were recognized among the tribes of Virginia simply disappeared from the records. They were no longer considered to be Native Americans or Indians as they were called. Their children were not recognized as members of the tribes, and they're living with that legacy right now.
Plecker and his many supporters believed not only that races should never intermarry, they shouldn't even mingle. Strict segregation would last for generations. Blacks had to have their own schools and neighborhoods. So did Indians.
This was the schoolhouse, and for a long time, up until 1908, the church.
We blame Plecker, but he gave it to a very hungry audience. They ate it up.
Indeed, Plecker was seen as a heroic figure in an era when genetic engineering was becoming mainstream. The eugenics movement was white supremacy cloaked in science. Its supporters were many and influential, from leading academics at University of Virginia to wealthy industrialists.
We have to remember that in the 1920s, most people lived on farms. So people knew about livestock, they knew about growing corn, they knew about culling the herd and getting rid of the ones that weren't any good and keeping the ones that were the most sound. And so these ideas of animal husbandry were useful to people making biological arguments about society.
There was a lot of cross-pollination between Virginia's movement and Adolf Hitler's quest for a master race. The Richmond Times-Dispatch editorialized in 1924 that racial intermingling would ruin the white man. Quote, once a drop of inferior blood gets in his veins, he descends lower and lower in the mongrel scale. That was the year the General Assembly passed the Racial Integrity Act, narrowly defining race and making it illegal for whites to marry anyone of any other race. Plecker wrote to the governors of the rest of the states, urging them to pass similar laws to save the white race.
We have a law.
There's a sterilization law that's passed in Virginia, upheld later in the United States Supreme Court, allowing some 60,000 plus people to be sterilized in institutions, 32 states all over the country.
Well, we're trying to help them, Alice, and you too. Have your entire family sterilized.
The Racial Integrity Act, which Plecker pushed, stood until 1967, when the appropriately named Loving case about an interracial couple led to a U.S. Supreme Court reversal. But the damage to Virginia's Indian tribes continues. There are more than 560 federally recognized Indian tribes in the country, But none of Virginia's tribes, the ones that helped the settlers survive, have that crucial recognition, because Walter Plecker did everything he could to destroy evidence of their existence.
I don't know that you can ever atone for the bad things that have been done, and we are people who believe in forgiveness and humanity and brotherhood, and so let's make today a new day.
In less than a century, what Dr. Plecker feared the most has come to pass.
I'm sure that Dr. Plecker would be shocked to walk through a city like Washington, D.C., or for that matter, downtown Richmond, and see that there were people of different races walking hand in hand. It wasn't the world that he looked forward to. He really looked forward to a very different, much more restricted world.
Quote, prominent black activist Marcus Garvey once said, "I regard the Klan, the Anglo-Saxon clubs, and white American societies, as far as the Negro is concerned, as better friends of the race than all other groups of hypocritical whites put together." Garvey became convinced blacks would never be allowed to integrate with whites in the U.S., and he even met with leaders of the KKK who supported his scheme of separating the races. However, he made the mistake of saying the blacks should learn from the fervor of the white supremacist organization. It brought him into conflict with Du Bois, who called Garvey the most dangerous enemy of the Negro race in America and in the world. Unquote. Troy Lenon, black activist Marcus Garvey had a grudging admiration of the KKK. The Daily Telegraph. Let's shift our focus to the Roman Catholic philosophy of Marcus Garvey, the esteemed Roman Catholic hero. Quote, the first Catholic social encyclical Rerum Novarum, of New Things, issued by Pope Leo XIII in 1891, caused quite a stir as it spoke up for the rights of the oppressed working classes, one of Garvey's strong themes. Unquote. Our Catholic National Heroes. Jamaica Gleaner, October 27, 2013. Understanding the essence of Rerum Novarum requires either embracing a Catholic perspective and accepting its principles or rejecting them. Walter Wythe, a former Roman Catholic and spiritualist, is well equipped to elucidate on Rerum Novarum. He will provide a basic overview of Rerum Novarum, briefly delving into its historical context. Following this, reflect on the potential trajectory of Garvey's Roman Catholic philosophy, especially considering its adoption by the government of Jamaica, as we will explore later in this presentation. Always connect the dots independently, drawing your own conclusions.
I'm going to run you through the new economic order of the New World Order. And these are now quotes from Roman Catholic sources themselves. And I would like to tell you that you haven't experienced anything yet. Waiting to come to you. And I can tell you what it feels like because I have experienced it. If you ever want to read an interesting book, read Ecclesiastical Megalomania, but I'll be quoting from encyclicals and all these things. According to canon law, the control of all property of the Roman Church state belongs to the Pope, its supreme emperor. Everything I say will have a quote now. Everything is substantiated by either a papal encyclical or any one of these. Now, communism took all property away and made it the state's property. Capitalism says the property belongs to the individual and nobody has the right to take it away. Now, if that is thesis and antithesis, then something in between is what we will want. So the Pope condemned communism, but he also condemns capitalism. The New World Order will be something in between in the name of fairness. So let us have a look at these issues. The economic thought of the Roman Catholic Church, private property. Thomas Aquinas wrote no treatise on economics, but his thinking based on that of Aristotle is foundational for understanding the economic thought of the Roman Catholic Church. Every time there is a quote. Now, what did Thomas Aquinas say? Roman Catholic economic thought is developed by the popes in their encyclicals and by the Roman Church State Councils, has been a contributor to 1. Feudalism, guild socialism in Europe during the Middle Ages, fascism in Italy, Spain, Portugal, Nazism in Germany in the 20th century, interventionism and redistributive state in the West, including the United States in the 20th century, and liberation theology in Latin America and Africa in the 20th century. What does this mean? Thomas Aquinas said, the possession of all things in common is natural law. Thomas wrote, the possession of all things in common and use of universal freedom are said to be of the natural law, because to wit the distinction of possessions and slavery were not brought in by nature, but devised by human reason for the benefit of human life. Now what does all that mean? It simply means property is for common good. You may own it, but it is for common good. The community of goods, wrote Thomas, is ascribed to natural law, not that the natural law dictates that all things should be possessed in common and that nothing should be possessed as one's own. So you may possess things, yes. But because the division of possessions is not according to natural law, but rather arose from human agreement, which belongs to positive law, they talk such drivel, it's interesting, never mind. Hence the ownership of possessions is not contrary to natural law, but an addition thereto devised by human reason. Let's continue. Thomas wrote, hence, whatever certain people have in superabundance is due by natural law to the purpose of succoring the poor. Okay, now we're getting there. You may possess things, whatever you possess, but whatever you possess more than you need is there for the common good of those that don't have. Does that make sense? Now, what if you create two classes of individuals, the rich and the poor? Or what if there is a situation where you have two classes, the rich and the poor? You can go across the world and you can look at the rich nations and the poor nations, and you will find that the rich nations are all the Protestant nations. Have you noticed that? All the Protestant nations are the rich. Now, what if you had a plan to disinherit them all, so that you would again be ruler and they would have to come and beg at your feet for anything like that? Now let's have a look at this, how this unfolds. For the purpose of succoring the poor. Because the goods of some are due to others by natural law, there is no sin if the poor take the goods of their neighbors. Thomas wrote, in cases of need, all things are common property, so that there would seem to be no sin in taking another's properties, for the need has made it common. Okay. Now, there's the aspect of sharing. If I see my neighbor in trouble, as a good Christian, I will help him out, right? Yes. But now we're looking at law. So if my neighbor has need, and who determines the need? He determines the need. I have need. I have a need. I have a need of a television, and I don't have one, and you have one. And you have money, and you can go and buy yourself another one. I have need of your television. Can he then take it without being a sinner, yes or no? According to this, yes. What if you have a car and he doesn't have one? He can take it without sin, according to Thomas Aquinas. Now, this was a long time ago. Surely this doesn't apply today. Well, we'll see. Not only is such taking of another's property not a sin, it is not even a crime, according to Thomas. It is lawful for a man to succor his own need by means of another's property by taking it either openly or secretly, nor is this, properly speaking, theft and robbery. It is not theft, properly speaking, to take secretly and use another's property in a case of extreme need, because that which he takes for the support of his life becomes his own property by reason of that need. In a case of a like need, a man may also take secretly another's property in order to succor his neighbor in need. Oh, this gets very interesting. Now, did you know that if I leave my property unattended in South Africa and somebody moves in, I cannot throw him out? He's in because he has need. That's the law. And you think that is a South African law? No, that is a British law as well. That is a law virtually all over the country now, but it's not being implemented because the situation is not such yet that it has to be implemented everywhere. Once you start opening the borders and millions of poor people start coming in, well, then there will be great need. What did they do with need overseas? So, in South Africa, people go on holiday, they come back, their house is occupied. And they can't throw the people out. Because their property is in their name, they have to pay the bills, they have to pay the rates, they have to pay all those things, but need made it common, therefore that man can move in. Is that the situation? Yes, it is. It gets worse. The Roman Catholic doctrine of private property is echoed in the 19th century communist slogan, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Can you see the Roman Catholic doctrine there? Human rights are more important than property rights. It was the creed of Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. We shall take from the haves and give to the have-nots who need it so much. Lyndon Johnson said that. What continent is that? It appears in the literature of fascism, Nazism, liberation theology, interventionism, and socialism. The universal destination of goods. This is John Paul II's expression of it in 1987 in an encyclical called On Social Concern. It is necessary to state once more the characteristic principle of Christian social doctrine. The goods of this world are originally meant for all. The right of private property is valid and necessary, but it does not nullify the value of this principle. Private property, in fact, is under a social mortgage, which means that it has an intrinsically social function based upon the justified precisely by the principle of universal destination of goods. Oops! What did John Paul II just say? He said that what Thomas said is what I say. You may have private property. The Roman Catholic Church is for private property. That sounds very nice. But it's never qualified that that property is only yours for common good. So one day you wake up and in your garden you have squatters. And you call the police and you say, hey, or you go out and you say, get off my property. And they say, let me alone or I'll blow your head off. Hey, you go to the cops, you say, cops, come help here, people are squatting on my land. Sorry, they have need. You have too much land anyway, live with it. Okay. Pope Paul VI made the point quite clear in 1967 encyclical on the progress of people. Each man has therefore the right to find in the world what is necessary for himself. This gets interesting. The recent Council, Vatican II, reminded us of this. God intended the earth and all that it contains for the use of every human being and people. Thus, as all men follow justice and unite in charity, created goods should abound for them on a reasonable basis. All other rights whatsoever, including those of property and of free commerce, are to be subordinate to this principle. That means if I have need of a manufactured good, can I take it? So now I'm driving my car, and we have a hijacking just about every 12 minutes. And a gun comes in and says, get out of the car, and I relinquish my car, and if I don't, what happens to me? I get shot. The man has need of my car. It's gone. Finished. In my own church at home, we've had hijackings after hijackings. Even the pastor. They beat him up and tried to put him into the trunk of the car. They would have killed him. He managed to fight himself free, and off he went without his car. Do you think there's any big action to find these things? No, occasionally here and occasionally there. Do you think there's any big action when the farmers are killed and they move onto the lands? No, a little bit here and a little bit there just to keep people happy. But basically nothing is done, and the police hands are cut off. The law says that. There's nothing you can do. The other day, two cyclists were traveling along when they were hijacked by 5 gunmen demanding their bikes. So they took out, they were armed because they expect this is becoming like the Wild West, and they defended themselves, injured one, and got away. And guess what? The 2 cyclists are in jail. Yes, serving a sentence for injuring someone without need. They could have given them the bicycles. That would have solved the problem. You see? how the law has turned upside down. Gaudium et Spes, the Vatican II Constitution, Pope Paul quoted, explains at greater length. If one is in extreme necessity, he has the right to procure for himself what he needs out of the riches of others. Now, who defines necessity? Since there are so many people prostrate with hunger in the world, the Sacred Council urges all, both individuals and governments, to remember the aphorism of the fathers: feed the man dying of hunger, because if you have not fed him, you have killed him. Therefore, because private property is immoral, all men, individuals and governments have the moral obligation to redistribute goods held unjustly by property owners. Have you heard of redistribution of goods lately? Have you heard of it many times lately? Yes, there is going to be a redistribution. All goods includes not just goods found in nature, but manufactured goods as well. John Paul II declared that all men must have access to those goods, quote, which are intended for common use, both the goods of nature and manufactured goods. I own nothing. Only on paper do I own anything. The state rules supreme. My life soon could be a misery. So if you are attached to your homes here in Canada, and this is the basis for the New World Order, if you are attached to your cars and your televisions and all these things, loosen yourself. Because soon they will be redistributed, and there will be nothing that the white or black or pink Protestant can do about it. And if some others suffers in the way, that is fair enough. The ends justifies the means. The redistribution will go as it should be. Rerum novarum. Who's heard of Rerum novarum? This is the papal encyclical that was issued, that is being quoted to this day, Pope John's. And to this day, all of them make reference to this, including Pope John Paul II, says this is this encyclical that forms the basis of the New World Order. Well, I thought it's important to study it. One of the Roman Church State's most influential statesmen on economic matters is the encyclical Rerum Novarum on the condition of the working classes. The Roman Church State allied herself with the proletariat, which in Marxism is the great and final enemy of the capitalist order. Pius, writing, declared that Rerum Novarum, however, stood out in this, that it laid down for all mankind unerring rules for the right solution of difficult problems of human solidarity, called the social question. Now, let's see. By far the most notable evidence of this social teaching and action which the Church has set forth through the centuries, undoubtedly, is the encyclical Rerum Novarum, issued 70 years ago. The norms and recommendations contained therein were so momentous that their memory will never fall into oblivion. John, Mater e Magistra, the papacy speaking. Pope Pius told us that the encyclical Rerum Novarum was instrumental in ending laissez-faire capitalism in the 20th century by ushering in an era of effective interference by the government. Have you got this? Let's see how it ends up. Rerum Novarum was the voice of moral authority needed to ensure the development of effective interference by all governments in the 20th century. How many governments? All. Pius wrote, "It is not surprising, therefore, that under the teaching and guidance of the Church, many learned priests and laymen earnestly devoted themselves to problems of elaborating social and economic science in accordance with the condition of our age. Under the guidance and light of Leo's encyclical, Rerum Novarum was thus involved a truly Christian social science, which continues to be fostered and enriched daily. Tireless labors, all these people, labors, now note carefully, of those picked men whom we have named the auxiliaries of the Church." So everybody working in the secret societies, the Opus Dei, the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Columbus, all of these people working, those picked men, to bring this about. Nor were there the only blessings which followed from the encyclical. The doctrine of Rerum Novarum began little by little to penetrate amongst those who, being outside Catholic unity, do not recognize the authority of the Church. And these Catholic principles of sociology gradually became the part of the intellectual heritage of the whole human race. Where are we going? I'd like to know. Thus too we rejoice that the Catholic truths proclaimed so vigorously by our illustrious predecessor are advanced and advocated not merely in non-Catholic books and journals, but frequently in legislative assemblies and in courts of justice. Those picked men whom we have named the auxiliaries of the church who have been instrumental. This is John Robbins writing. Who are they? Under fascism, property owners may keep their property titles and deeds, but the use of their property is, as Leo wrote, common. Fascism is a form of socialism that retains the forms and trappings of capitalism, but not its substance. This is basically what it boils down to. When we speak of reform of institutions, the state becomes chiefly to mind, not as if universal well-being were to be expected from its activities. And what is the state going to do in all of this? The experiment with economic freedom, Pius wrote, must end. And economic life must again be subjected to planning and government. Who wants to control your economic life? Government. John Paul II wrote in his Sollicitudo Re Socialis on social concern, it is necessary to state once more the characteristic principle of Christian social doctrine. The goods of this world are meant for all. Private property is under social mortgage. These are the things which will be controlled. He wrote, a faithful echo of the centuries-old tradition of the Church regarding the universal purpose of good. In today's world, wrote the Pope, we are faced with a serious problem of unequal distribution of the means of subsistence originally meant for everybody. Then came liberation theology, and Pius wrote an encyclical on atheistic communism, an age like ours, where unusual misery has resulted. Who created the misery? They created it so that they can create the solution which they want. So, in Africa, they elevate a few and suppress the masses. Then they turn it around and they create the situation that they want. They create communism, they create the chaos. Out of the chaos, they create the social order which they want. So the second reign of terror was supported by the papacy. Father Camilo Terres, who was shot in 1966, declared, the Catholic who is not a revolutionary is living in mortal sin. Pope John Paul II wrote in 1968, the Church does not hesitate to defend fearlessly the just and noble cause of human rights and to support courageous reforms leading to a better distribution of goods, including earthly goods such as education, health service, housing, and so forth. Now we come to human rights. What did we read about in the French Revolution? What's going to be the standard of the world? Human rights. You have a right to property. You have a right to anything that you have need of. We are convinced that the theology of liberation is not only timely, but useful and necessary. That's what the Pope says, not me. This is his words directly. John Paul II, letter to Brazilian bishops. It should constitute a new stage of the theological reflection initiated within the apostolic tradition. And then he refers to rerum novarum. Franklin Roosevelt, when he was elected, he made Professor Ryan part of his administration. Now, who was he? Ryan wrote in 1931, the workers have a claim upon industry for all the means of living from the time they begin to work until they die. When industry does not do it directly, then it is the business of government to enforce it upon industry. See how it starts? Right. Now, let's look at some of the human rights. You have a right to freely found unions for working people. You have a right to culture, a right to emigrate, a right to immigrate, a right to food, a right to clothing, a right to rest, a right to medical care, a right to just wage, a right to life, a right to safe environment, a right to personal security of workers, a right to family life, a right to private property, highly qualified, of course. A right to common use of all goods is just thereafter, so that means nothing. A right to work, a right to pension, a right to old age, insurance, a right to association, a right to security, a right to integrity, a right to social services, a right to strike, a right to choose a state of life freely, a right to found a family, a right to education, employment, good reputation, respect, appropriate information, a right by the upright, blah, 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 protection of privacy, right for freedom, professional training, quality, right to adequate health care. Oh, it's laborious. How do you control that? How do you control it? If you're going to control every aspect of that, then you must control every aspect of a person's life. You will not be able to go to the toilet in future without making a triple application to the Vatican. They're going to control every single aspect of your lives. That's what they're going to control. And government is going to become super huge. Now, where's the money going to come from? From you. Now, when the money comes from you, what then happens to your wealth? It gets less and less and less and less. That means the middle class will disappear. How many classes under Catholicism in the Middle Ages? 2. There was a feudal class, the Goyim, and there was the upper class who controlled everything. Now, if we take employment, in my country, employment was running at almost 50%. In Germany, it was running at point-something percent. And then it went up to 2, 3, 5, 10, 20%. Now unemployment is rife in Europe. Why? Because all the East Bloc countries are now being incorporated into Europe, and there must be redistribution of wealth. And so it's coming down, 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 down. The recent surveys don't ask where you live. They say, how many rooms have you got? How many people live there? How many this? How many that? When did they do that, and in what country? In communism. And what happened if your house was bigger than your need? The one who had the need got it. But who has to pay for it? You, because you own it. It's even worse now than in communism, right? So they came to our country. Now you have to register in each individual location. And you may not vote outside your location, so that they have your location attached to your name. And then they came to my house and they said, they want to know, what is my religion? I said, I'm a Christian. They said, which denomination are you? I said, it's none of your business. They said, it is my business. Which denomination are you? I said, it's none of your business. How many rooms have you got? I said, enough. We want to know exactly how many rooms you have. I said, I have enough. Well, we want to know exactly. It's got nothing to do with you. Why do you want to know exactly? I could have another one next week, or I could put a wall in and I could have 2, right? So none of your business. You get into big trouble if you answer questions like that. You're not supposed to do that. Therefore, there must be made available to all men everything necessary for leading a life truly human. Did you know that living a life truly human is the Catholic acronym for salvation? And I will prove this to you in a future lecture, where they say to be saved means to live a life truly human. That means the kingdom of God for Catholicism is the kingdom of Catholicism ruling the world on this earth and giving everyone the capacity to live a life truly human. That means enough to take care of your basic needs and nothing else. Do you like the New World Order? Do you like it? You know what? The Bible calls him the man of sin. Now, there's another word for the redistribution of wealth, and I've given it to you already. What is it? It's called theft. That's right. The Bible says, thou shalt not steal. That means thou shalt not take from one who has and give it to someone else. That's called theft. That's breaking the commandments of God. Is that correct? Yes. We will see that this system of human rights breaks every single commandment of God as we go along. When God distributed land to Israel, how was it distributed? As an eternal inheritance. It was your land. Ahab wanted Naboth's vineyard. And Naboth said to him, I will not sin against the Lord my God, because this land has been given to me as an eternal inheritance and to my children. God gives each one a piece that is his. They take it and distribute it according to need, but you pay the bill. Fascinating. The complex circumstance of our day makes it necessary for public authority to intervene more often in social, economic, and cultural matters. The Second Vatican Council, that's what it said. So they're going to intervene at every level of your life. Lob von Gorbatschow für den Papst. Gorbatschow praises the Pope, and he says the Pope is right in his demand for a new world order. In 1991, the San Francisco Chronicle already said Pope calls for a new world order. Albert Einstein says, mankind's desire for peace can be realized only by the creation of a world government. With all my heart, I believe that the world's present system of sovereign nations can only lead to barbarism, war, and inhumanity, and that only law can assure progress towards a civilized, peaceful humanity. Interesting statement, Albert Einstein. What did he also state? He says, there is no salvation for civilization or even the human race other than to creation of a world government. That was Albert Einstein. What did U Thant, former Secretary General of the United Nations, say? He said, world federalists hold before us the vision of a unified mankind living in peace under a just world order. The heart of their program, a world under law, is realistic and attainable. What did Mortimer Adler say? World peace is impossible without world government. Winston Churchill. These are big names. I'm not talking about small fry. The creation of an authoritative world order is the ultimate aim towards which we must strive. Charles de Gaulle, nations must unite in a world government or perish. How do you do that? How about creating so much conflict that everybody will be willing to give up their sovereignty? Do you know what? In South Africa, I give these lectures to the public. The people are in despair. They are being robbed, driven off their land, they're being murdered. Our houses look like prisons. We cannot go to sleep without locking everything. In my very own little block, we've had murder after murder after murder, and robberies, aggravating robberies, and nothing seems to happen. The police don't even care, they don't even come out, because there is so much turmoil all over the place that they cannot even cope with it. So who cares about your little problem that you've just lost everything? Take it to the insurance and see if you can get it back. Irrespective of the pain. They come in, they move in, they take all your private papers, they burn them. You have no record of your life, everything's gone. They sell the furniture they don't want, and the rest they keep for themselves and say, get lost. It's now time for redistribution. You had land before, now it's my land. That's how it goes. This is the New World Order. Welcome to the New World Order. Bertrand Russell, the only possibilities are now world government or death. The Humanist Manifesto, too, urges us to move towards the building of a world community. Robert Miller, former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, said, we must move as quickly as possible to a one-world government, a one-world religion, under a one-world leader. I wonder who that is going to be. These are big, big names that I'm putting on the screen. These aren't speculators here and there. I'm often accused for speculating. Well, the biggest speculators are these people themselves. And what about this man? We saw how peace and unity was to come about.
It was great.
A great feeling of excitement,
peace.
of peace,
unity,
of love, peace, love, and unity.
Unity.
Yes.
All nations will come and
calls for a new world order, CNN, Thursday, January 1, 2004. He made his whole New Year's speech revolve around the new world order. I want to tell you today that the new world order is intended not just to unite the nations which God had separated, that's one aspect, but to eradicate Protestantism of the face of the earth. And particularly that form of Protestantism which refuses to bow to the papal Caesar. That form of Protestantism will have to go. And we will see that under the circumstances that will be created, these conditions are all in place right now. It is all there. And I will put it on the screen for you, so don't miss the next lectures. Now we're getting into hot territory. I'll put the quotes on the screen where they will tell you who the problem children are going to be. And don't think it's Islam. It's someone else. Don't miss the next exciting episode.
Masonic philosophy of Garvey. Quote, during the final 4 years of his life, Garvey turned even more emphatically toward the Masonic ideal based on secret knowledge. With the defeat of Ethiopia in the Italo-Ethiopian War of 1935 to 1936, and the rapid escalation of militarism throughout Europe and Asia, Garvey revised dramatically his previous estimates of what political movements alone could be expected to accomplish. Thus, he viewed as problematic the absence of Masonry in his The Negroes, Political Ideals, noting that there is nothing secret in what he is aiming at for his own hope of preservation. Garvey was alluding to the evolution of the fraternal idea, from its earlier craft stage into a potent political vehicle, one based on the organization of secret revolutionary brotherhoods. Unquote. University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, African Studies Center. Volume 1, 1826 to August 1919. Jamaica has embarked on teaching the philosophy of Garvey to grade 1 students. Quote, the Ministry of Education has announced that 1,844 grade 1 students across the country have been enrolled in a program that facilitates the teaching of the philosophies of Jamaica's first national hero, Marcus Garvey. Education Minister Fayval Williams said, the initiative was first introduced to the curriculum unit of the ministry in July 2022 by a private entity. Mrs. Williams said, the initiative was seen as a potential opportunity to augment the implementation of the mandatory civics program in schools. She explained that the Marcus Garvey Teaching in School team has already launched a pilot program in a number of early childhood institutions. The minister said, the team also invested in teaching material, and the ministry is satisfied with the program. We have 22 early childhood institutions and 24 primary schools that currently are a part of the program. Of course, this spans all parishes and therefore all regions. We have a total of 72 teachers, she disclosed. The minister added that workshops are taking place to prepare more teachers to participate in the program, so it can be expanded to other schools. Mrs. Williams was addressing Wednesday's post-cabinet press briefing. Unquote. Raquel Porter. Radio Jamaica New, RJR, for 42 p.m., Thursday, November 23, 2023. Jamaica, Philosophy of Garvey, the Child and the Jesuits. Quote, give me a child until he is 7, and he will remain a Catholic the rest of his life. Unquote. Common Jesuit saying. I conclude this section with a quote from Paul Prescott. And I quote, the logical conclusion of Garvey's racial ideology was fully revealed in his dealings with the Ku Klux Klan and the Jim Crow South. These backroom dealings would further isolate him from popular black opinion. Garvey's views on Jim Crow were incoherent, In one breath he denounced it, and in the next offered praise. He said the South deserves credit for having lynched race pride into the Negroes. Since he viewed the world as a competition between races in the quest for civilization, an almost begrudging admiration for Jim Crow can be seen in Garvey. In one speech, Garvey remarked, "I'm not vexed with the white man of the South for Jim Crowing me because I'm black. I never built any streetcars or railroads. The white man built them for your own convenience." On June 25, 1922, Garvey met with Edward Clark, a high-ranking Klan leader. Stein places this move in the context of his elitist perspective on politics and organizational need to grow in the South. According to Stein, Garvey's politics was the diplomacy of elites. The Klan meeting was a bold attempt to advance the UNIA in the South through political symmetry. The meeting with the Klan brought denunciation, not just from established black figures, but from within the UNIA as well. Even apart from this meeting, the UNIA's unwillingness to challenge the institutions of Jim Crow prevented them from developing a mass base in the South. Stein explains, for most Southern blacks, the burdens of political powerlessness were central to the prospects of the race. Groups that deferred those issues might become social clubs, useful to small numbers, but they could not become mass organizations of significant racial power. Unquote. Paul Prescott, The Rise and Fall of Marcus Garvey. In this presentation, I've opted for conciseness by providing historical quotes, with the hope that you will verify the information, conduct your research, and form your conclusions. Regardless of your admiration or criticism, Marcus Mosiah Garvey is acknowledged as one of Jamaica's Roman Catholic and Masonic national heroes, in good standing with the Roman Catholic Church, with Sir Alexander Bustamante being the other Roman Catholic national hero. On the Baptist side, Samuel Sharp, Paul Bogle, and George William Gordon are celebrated as heroes in Jamaica. Garvey, a Roman Catholic and Freemason, who embraced Jim Crow philosophy, represents a distinctive amalgamation. His eclectic philosophy weaves together Roman Catholic economic and social doctrines, with Masonic ideals rooted in secret knowledge, influenced by Jim Crow laws. This fusion is integrated into the education of first graders in Jamaica, aligning with the Jesuit saying, "Give me a child until he is 7, and he will remain a Catholic the rest of his life." The process of the Catholicization of Jamaica, disguised under Garvism, has received the kickstart it needed. My primary goal has been to present historical quotations, encouraging viewers to independently verify and assess the content. I also suggest exploring Rerum Novarum, due to its significant impact on various aspects of individuals' lives on Earth. Rome, when in the minority, is as gentle as a lamb. Rome, when in equality, is as clever as a fox. Rome, when in the majority, is as fierce as a tiger. Lastly, while recognizing that all roads lead to the acceptance of Roman Catholicism, I emphasize the unique path paved with Emmanuel's blood. This path leads to the holiest place, where our great high priest mediates between God and those who have surrendered their lives to Him, solely through faith in Jesus Christ, without relying on any human deeds or works. Thank you for viewing this documentary presentation. I am Queen Elizabeth I for Wongerful.